not yet a full standing committee, but we do have quite a bit to share. We're really grateful to the districts and the BOG for creating the priority around diversity, equity, and inclusion that the executive committee has sort of put forth by the creation of a task force. Tonight's presentation is two-part. The first part is going to be delivered by Steve Reynolds from Deschutes Brewery. Sorry, not Steve Reynolds. Doug Reynolds. I'm
Steve
sorry,
Reynolds
Doug.
is my grandfather's name, so that really threw me for a second.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm conflating you with Steve. My apologies. And then to follow that up, my colleague on the task force, Eric Richardson, will be reporting on what we're doing with the MBAA task force, where we're at in our sort of work, and we'd love to have a robust conversation afterwards. I think I'm going to leave it at that because I know that the Deschutes presentation is a good one, and it's got some meat to it. So I think Doug, if you want to just take it from there, that would be great.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. Just a couple of things here for clarity. Can everybody see my screen? Is that being shared?
Yep.
Yes.
Steve, though.
Yeah. All right. Hopefully not all my notes. Hopefully just hopefully just seeing the big graphic there. Well, first of all, thank you, Susan, and hi, and thank you all for having Deschutes Brewery here today. It's such an honor to be here, and I want to thank you all for being in attendance, and hopefully you find something useful here, or at least something interesting. Again, my name is Doug Reynolds, and this is a case study in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and starting that committee in the craft brewing industry. We call this Talk Less, Smile More. There'll be room at the end for questions that I will do my best to answer. So please write down any that arise for you during this presentation, and we'll address them during the Q&A at the end of my portion before I hand off to Eric. One just a personal caveat here, probably won't surprise any of you all, but I am working from my home office today, and I do have a dog. So apologies in advance if she decides that she needs to make an audio appearance. All right, and moving on here. So just real quick, I want to acknowledge on the right-hand side there, you'll see Veronica Vega. She's our Director of Product Development at Deschutes Brewery, and she's also the founder of our DEI Committee. I'm there on the left. I'm based out of Portland, and my official roles here are as Pub Marketing Coordinator and Director of Community Involvement. I'm currently also the temporary DEI Coordinator, while our usual DEI Coordinator, Lindsay Winglosky, is on leave. I also chair our Q Committee, which is our LGBTQIA+ affinity and advocacy team, and the DEI Community Outreach Subcommittee. So just so that you know who I am and where I'm coming from with this, little 60-second bio here. I was born and raised in Alaska in a very strict religious household where my orientation, even as a child, was a point of shame and secrecy for me. I went on to get my Bachelor of Fine Arts from Southern Oregon University in the Theater Arts program. So yes, was it Chris? Yes, we do have an actor here today who also has been waiting tables for a long time. My background growing up in an intolerant home prompted me later in life to become an author and illustrator of books for LGBTQIA kids in an effort to help reduce that high suicide rate among queer youth. I started at Deschutes in 2009 as a busser, and I want to talk to you just briefly before we get started about my experience of being quote unquote the only. I think because it cuts to not only the work that we're doing here today, what it's about, but why it's important and who it affects. At my very first job, when I was 16 years old, I had a very negative experience with homophobia in the workplace and the resulting fallout of institutionalized tolerance of homophobia that has stuck with me to this day. When a coworker became aware of my sexuality, they had a meltdown. He started screaming homophobic slurs in front of the guests, and the result was not that he was punished, but that I was demoted to part-time and my schedule was changed to fit around his so that he would not have to work with. This was before the law changed to protect queer individuals, which just happened last year. So honestly, back in the 90s, I was lucky just not to have been fired. But because of this experience, I made the decision in my life that I would no longer be the only at my job again. And while that limited my employment and career advancement options, I never again worked anywhere where I was the only gay person on staff. In fact, I never would have worked at Deschutes at all if there hadn't been a gay friend of mine who came to me and talked about what an inclusive, wonderful place it was for him to work. And over the years, I've had many well-meaning co-owners come to me and say, oh, it must be nice. There's so many gays at work. There's so many more than other places. When in actuality, the ratio of LGBTQ people at Deschutes is pretty on par with the general population, but we're just usually not as well represented in most places, especially I feel like in the brewing industry. But this isn't really a unique experience, and it's not irregular for an LGBTQ person or a veteran, Indigenous, a person of color, a disabled person, a woman. It's not unusual for people to be the only in an organization. So while this can sometimes be a jarring concept if you've never had that experience, I think it's important to mention because it really cuts to the heart of what this is all about. Some credit here where credit is due. You just heard from Susan. There she is over on the right. This group barely scratches the surface of the people that we should be giving credit to, but I want to note Susan. I want to note Dr. J. Nicole Jackson Beckman at Crafted for All, which is an organization that has some really great resources on diversity, equity, and inclusion in our industry. And for me, I want to give a huge shout out to Gracie Harkema, who is our DEI consultant. I cannot express how impactful working with her has been to me personally. She's not just phenomenal at what she does, she's also a phenomenal person. And she's from your neck of the woods. She's across the lake over there in Michigan. Sounds like there's maybe a little bit of state rivalry going on, but she's definitely from your area. And she has a really inspiring story and she does some really inspiring work. So if you ever get a chance to talk to Gracie or hire Gracie or anything like that, highly recommend. All right, so let's just jump right in. Basic question, why DEI? Why should diversity, equity, and inclusion be a part of your company? And why, how can you talk to people in your company about this? I think there's two main arguments for people that have any kind of hesitancy or uncertainty about how this fits in. The first is the human argument, the moral argument. So on that, I want to ask you a couple questions, and whether you have your camera on or not, go ahead and shake your head, yes or no, just to affirm to yourself. Do you create a product or service that you sell to people? You want to grow, capture new audiences, and create loyal fans for life? And do you work with people? Do you want the people that you work with to feel safe, to feel welcome, to feel supported, to feel that they belong and are valued while at work? If you said yes to any of these, then incorporating a DEI lens into your business can have a major impact. What do you think of, though, when you think of diversity? I mean, what does that mean to you? I know for me, as like growing up in a small town in the 80s, when I thought of diversity, I thought of race. That's what diversity meant to me. But even as somebody that's advocated for diversity for years of my life, this came as a surprise to me. Diversity encompasses so much more than what comes to mind on the surface level. An interesting fact about diversity is that the less homogenous our work is, the better odds we have of not only business success, but of creating a culture where inclusivity can continue to grow. Diversity leads to more diversity. And diversity doesn't just mean one particular thing. It doesn't just mean singling out one particular group of people. Diversity means all people. Which brings me to my next argument for incorporating DEI, the business argument. So I'm not going to dive too deep here, but this study looked at the business outcomes for companies that not only had diversity of thought, but also had cultures that supported differences and valued inclusion. These companies were twice as likely to meet or exceed financial targets, 3 times as likely to be high performing, 6 times more likely to be innovative and agile, and 8 times more likely to achieve better business outcomes. So business, like life, thrives in diverse environments. So why now? I mean, inequality is nothing new. So why did Deschutes decide to really go for this now? At the end of 2019, I started Q Committee up in Portland, and it was very much supported by senior staff. Veronica came to me and said that she had all these thoughts about starting a larger D&I committee, that she shared some resources and some research that she had done. And around that time too, we brought on Gracie as our consultant, and it felt like an important step, but still the work didn't feel urgent for us until George Floyd was murdered. Breonna Taylor, the new civil rights movement has really sprung up over this last year. And like many places around the country, this movement hit hard in Portland. Our co-owners in Portland were very engaged. They were coming to work with eyes red from pepper spray the night before, with respirators to use after work. They participated in a day-long strike that shut down our pub. They raised money for Black Lives Matter banners and to help create harm reduction backpacks for at-risk youth. They were so engaged, and it was electric, and they were outspoken and standing up. So how could we just look away and continue business? We listened. We put out our statement on Black Lives Matter, but we also knew that we couldn't just talk the talk, we also had to walk the walk here. So that's when the hard work began. Beyond that statement of solidarity, how could we follow through? So we asked ourselves a few questions. How should we in the craft beer business respond to horrifying events that affect our society? One of our core values at Deschutes is crafted for community, so how do we live up to that? How can we bring people together in a time of crisis? And what can we do more as individuals? So that led us to assembling our DEI. First steps here, create a space, a safe space. We are, this last year, it's fluctuated a lot, but we're around right now between 200 and 300 employees. We're spread across 28 states, 2 different pubs, 2 tasting rooms. So for us, a virtual forum made the most sense so that everybody could feel like they were engaged or had the option to be engaged. But it's not just about creating that physical or digital space. It's also about creating a psychological space for this work to be done. And these can be very difficult, emotionally charged conversations. So we try to acknowledge that. We, at the beginning of meetings, we try to acknowledge our shortcomings, the differences of thought and background experience, the differences in education, and also just be very straightforward about the fact that we're all imperfect. Second would be understand people's motivations. So ask why, what brings you here? And include yourself in that conversation and be frank. To go off on a little side note here, I was raised to believe that aside from neo-Nazis and the KKK, racism was a thing of the past. Our family in particular believed that we had transcended racism, that despite some homophobia and transphobia in my family, we believed ourselves to be unbiased people. But after Trayvon Martin was murdered a few years ago and the Black Lives Matter movement began, Harvard put out a racial bias test online that anyone could take. And kind of eager to have a badge of virtue to demonstrate my anti-racism, I took the test and was shocked. And I took it again because I didn't believe it. And I took it again. And what the test showed was that I had a strong unconscious bias against Black people. Now, this ran counter to everything I knew and thought and believed about myself. I was in denial, then I got angry, then I was ashamed. But then I started listening and I started learning. And over the years, eventually I joined this DEI committee as a way to not only commit myself to make a positive change in the world, but to make a positive change in myself. That was the story that I shared when we started the DEI committee. And I think that just being honest about things like that in your life goes a long way. Third, create a structure, meetings, agendas, spaces to share documents, either physically or online. Set a time for meeting that's a regular time that's going to happen. We did Fridays, every Friday for a while there. That frequency might change as you settle in and get the structure more in place and things kind of work a little bit more autonomously. So then we went to every other week, and now we're once a month. And then we have our subcommittees that do their own thing. But as for our main committee, that's how it's structured. Next, ask for help. Find a co-chair, find some subcommittee chairs. So important. Don't try to do this by yourself. It's actually quite a lot of work. Encourage cross-functional collaboration. Identify how your subcommittees overlap with each other and with existing departments. Communication to senior management. Make sure that this is a two-way channel. We always send senior management our agenda, our minutes, our updates, and we have a designated person on the team. We have a designated person on the team that takes questions that we have to senior management and relays responses to us. Company culture. So incorporating DEI, it isn't about changing your culture per se, it's about addition to your culture. We looked at our core values as a guide to help create our mission and goals, but we also allowed room for what we were learning to influence our overall company mission. So beyond that, we want to ask, like, what is important to the way you operate with your staff? We identified transparency, two-way communication, open communication, yearly reviews and market wage surveys, and adding to that the idea that inclusion and equity is about everyone and benefits everyone in the company because of that, and outside the company as far as like our communities. So this really manifests itself in a subtle but important way in adding to our company mission statement that we desire to foster a sense of belonging. That's what it was always about for Gary Fish when he started the pubs, but like it wasn't expressly put down in that way. So you're going to want to do an assessment of where you're at before you start building your action plan. To start, you have to really know where you stand. So this has been very vital for us. This is the foundation that we built our committee around. Create a survey. Step one, more to come on that. Market this survey to your team to get the maximum number of responses. We did not market this as a DEI survey because we didn't want people coming into it with preconceptions. We just did an overall survey of which DEI now had an aspect in there that was now taken into account. Encourage and incentivize people to participate, because the more responses you get, the more accurate your picture will be. You don't want to, I mean, you want to hear from everybody. You don't want to just hear from people that are going to jump at the chance to fill out a survey. Take open-ended comments and evaluate both analytically and by generating overall themes. One side note here I would put in is that if you do this, you're likely to get feedback that makes you cringe a little bit. So just expect that. Be willing to like let that communication be open. Here's some examples of questions that we used. I understand how my work contributes to Deschutes Brewery's mission. When I speak up, my opinion is valued. My job performance is evaluated fairly. Perspectives like mine are included in the decision making at Deschutes Brewery, and I would recommend Deschutes Brewery as a great place to work. So as far as the survey itself, these are the categories that we broke down: leadership and decision making, training and development, fairness, pay and benefits, building diverse teams, purpose and work environment, voice and communication, and culture and belonging. These categories really were meant to help co-owners to arrange their thoughts as they responded, but also to help us to arrange our responses and to find themes that would assist in the creation of the action plan. Speaking of which, the action plan. Now, all straightforward. I mean, it's kind of basic project management, but applying these ideas to your DEI efforts will go a long way towards helping you to make progress. So first, the mission. What are you trying to accomplish with your committee? The areas of focus, these are pulled from your assessment as you've looked at different themes in there. So where are you going to place your energy? What are you going to be looking to make changes on in your company? Because every company is different. So we can't just like tell you what we did and like have that expect to translate directly. Accountability. Who runs point on this? A lot of times this is people in their subcommittees that are heading up different projects. But sometimes this is just departmental things. And timeline. When will it be completed? So what are you trying to do? What are you focusing on? Who's responsible, and when's it going to be finished by? Our committee's mission is to create a safe and inclusive space for our co-owners and for those in our communities. We believe our community is stronger when everyone is included and appreciated. And we are committed to learning, listening, and improving while celebrating the diversity and humanity of all people. Our focus areas, there are three key ones here. We have voice, decision-making, and diversity. You'll note that ironic last photo. Insofar as the areas that we refer to as primary aspects of diversity, like race, ethnicity, ability, Deschutes has historically not been a very diverse company in those aspects. To touch briefly on these, what we mean by voice is making sure there is a diverse array of voices, that voices are given equal weight and that everyone feels included in that. So diverse, inclusive, and equal. What we mean by decision-making is ensuring that a diverse group of people are involved in the decision-making process and that those decisions are accounting for a diverse array of voices. But to do these two things, we need to make sure that we have a diverse group of people within the company to speak up and help to make those decisions. So as far as decision-making and two-way communication, we are committed to providing opportunities for engagement into decision-making and ensuring safe transparency for expressing and challenging ideas. We don't want this to be a shove it down your throat, this is our way, we decided. Like, we want this to be something that where everybody feels involved. So a look at some of our guiding principles here. Taking suggestions, making sure that everyone feels safe to make suggestions and providing the ability to do so, sometimes anonymously and without repercussion. Post-meeting surveys, not just after DEI related meetings, but at all times. Get feedback from what is working and what is not working from your meetings, large and small. Red teaming for ideas and solutions. Find an array of people, not just contrarians, but people that maybe aren't always as willing to speak up, and form a red team for your ideas. These will not only make your ideas stronger, but it will provide sometimes some unconsidered solutions. Again, little side note, my dad is a scene and lighting designer in theater, and he was a professor, and he used to say that for every show he worked on with students or by himself or whatnot, that he always had a segment called Bad Ideas, where everybody had to bring in like 3 ideas, whatever they were. They could, this wasn't brainstorming, this was tell us what's bad, what you think is a stupid idea. And 9 times out of 10, they were terrible. But he swore that every time he did it, there was at least one bad idea that ended up being brilliant or leading to another brilliant idea. So being adversarial or doing bad brainstorming can be extremely useful in not just challenging the status quo, but in bringing up new ideas that you haven't considered before. So the red team, very important. Transparency, make sure your staff knows what you're doing and why you're doing it, but also public transparency. We're currently working on our DEI landing page on our website with the intention of making our efforts visible to anyone who wants to see it, so that we can make ourselves accountable not only to ourselves and our staff, but also to our fans and the public as a whole. Meetups with each other, with other departments. Make sure you're engaging in active communication, sharing ideas. This also humanizes us to each other sometimes if we're in like distant departments, and develops bonds between those departments. One of the silver linings I think of this last year is that this form of meeting has become increasingly popular, and it's a little bit less awkward than it used to be. So we're all getting a little bit more used to it, and it has dramatically improved our cross-departmental relations and strengthened our bond as a team, because now even geographically disparate teams are having face-to-face meetings in a manner that no longer feels so disconnected. We commit to integrating diversity, equity, and inclusion into our recruiting, hiring, and retention process to ensure our hiring practices are inclusive, that we maintain a work culture where people feel welcome, safe, supported, and want to stay with us. We're going through the end of a very long process right now of redoing all of our job descriptions with a lens on equity and inclusion. There are great resources online for this, but we realized we were unintentionally limiting our applicant pool with exclusionary language that we had no idea was turning people away. Studies show that certain words or lack of specificity in a job description can have a dramatic impact on who even applies to work for you. So you might be accidentally turning away extremely valuable applicant without even knowing it. Second, job sourcing is related to that. In addition, in posting jobs to the same boards all the time, we were surprised. I mean, why be surprised then when you start to get the same sort of over and over, and then you don't have as much diversity of thought. So proactively looking for ways to expand our net and reducing the disparities that have historically existed in this area for us. Onboarding. Is the manner in which you're bringing candidates, or that we were asking ourselves, bringing candidates into our workforce, limiting them? Was it exclusionary or demoralizing in ways that we hadn't considered before? One example of this that was brought up was all of our posters in the pub, in the upstairs in the employee break room, were all white people, and anytime there was a couple, it was always a straight couple, and anytime it showed people working, it was always a man. Now, obviously, we want men, and we want white people, and we want straight people to work for us, but to think of it in a way of like, if you are a woman of color and you come in and that's what you're seeing in your workplace, is that feeling inclusive for you? So similar things like that we're thinking about. Hiring training, again, being very proactive about educating those who engage in hiring so that they have the resources and knowledge to do so in an inclusive and equitable way. Stay surveys. Rather than just ask people why do you want to work here? And then like when they're leaving, doing exit surveys, like, why are you leaving? We also want to ask, like, why do you stay? Why are you here? What are we doing well? What can we do better? What makes this someplace that you want to be? For training and communication, we commit to communicating the business case behind DEI to all co-owners through mandatory and opt-in training. So we just had an all co-owner mandatory training with Gracie called Why DEI that was very eye-opening. And we made this mandatory because we thought, like sexual harassment training or safety training, these are important aspects of our company and our culture. And it's oftentimes people who would opt out who are the ones that would benefit most from it. As far as opt-in training, we've tried to provide a variety of training materials. Some of that's online resources and like in our internet, reading, watching, and listening recommendations, podcasts, movies, books, stuff like that. And also our lunch and learns. These are monthly meetings on a wide array of topics, from psychological safety to the history of the trans community in Oregon. We just had a great one about like bias in hiring, and I'm putting together one now for June about like DEI and the arts. So these are optional virtual meetings that are recorded, and so that anybody unable to make that meeting can attend or can watch later. But these tend to be a little bit interactive, so we encourage people to actually attend when they occur. Communication, not just that there is communication, but ensuring that the language that's being used in communication is inclusive. We try to do a lot of regular updates in email, newsletters, informative posters, and soon on a blog on our website. Sharing successes and failures. So this goes back to transparency in a way. From the inception of our DEI team, we've been saying, here's what we've done wrong, and here's where we've failed. That started before our team even fully started. Like Michael Lalonde, our CEO, kind of leading the way on that and saying, here's, we've done great for we've supported Pride Northwest, Portland Pride Parade since 2007, before we were even open in Portland, and we've done Bubbles and Brunch to support that community, but we haven't partnered with a Black nonprofit, or like we haven't worked with a Hispanic brewery to ever collaborate on a beer. So like just being very open and honest about not only where you're doing good, but where you feel like you could do better. All right, so the rollout. Who owns the action plan? The action plan belongs to the DEI committee for us. The committee formed the action plan, the committee came together with these ideas, but then it's moderated and owned really by our DEI coordinator, Lindsay, currently by me. It's kind of a beast of a document, but it really helps to have that one person in charge to make sure that everybody else is, to help corral everyone else. Small group meetings, subcommittees have ownership over their own goals and commitments. They're self-governed with monthly updates to the DEI committee, and then regular check-ins with the DEI coordinator. Sometimes these are just informal little chats, just how's it going over there? How's this, what's your progress on this? Are you still going to make this deadline? And then listen, internally and externally, be willing to hear feedback and adapt to that. So what does success look like? What for you does success in this effort look like over 3 months or 6 months or a year or 5 years? What's your ultimate goal? What is your future state vision? For us at Deschutes, that future state vision would be a state where the DEI committee no longer exists because it's so integrated into our company culture and processes that we don't need the committee. It's sort of a unique job for us in that way, and that the ultimate goal of our job is to put ourselves out of work. All right, so now the work begins. Just to touch on main topics there, get buy-in from those in your company, build your structure, do your assessment, set your mission and priority areas, track your DEI projects like any other business using key performance indicators, and keep an eye on your future state vision. And with that, I will open it up for any questions.
I have one. Have you had any, I guess, I'm trying to figure out the best way to ask this. What actions do you take when you run across employees that don't want to buy, like that don't want, when you get a lot of resistance, like how do you get through to people?
No, that's a really great question.
And the brewing industry has a lot of different folks in it, and some of them aren't woke or as aware of these problems. How do you resolve that?
No, that's a great question. I think it's a question that's on everybody's mind going into this. There can be a lot of hesitancy just based on that idea. For myself, my approach has been to listen more than anything, and to say, like, to try to think of it as kind of funny. I said this the other day, but I like to think of everybody that comes to me with a question about this kind of thing or that has pushback as my grandmother, who would come to me and not have this be something where it's like gonna get high tension and get out of my life, because I wouldn't do that to my grandma. So for me, it's a lot about being willing to hear the other person, and a lot of times what they just want is their concerns to be expressed. I don't have a really good answer on like the correct way to do it with every single person, because every single person is different. I have approached people with the idea that, like, oh, well, this is about you as well. This is about you being part of the company as well as everybody else being part of the company. So I wish I had a better, like, overall blanket response. But I would say that a lot of times people just want to be heard. And long term, if you feel like there's somebody that is making others feel unsafe or not included, and that's obviously a whole different conversation that you would want to have. In the same way that if somebody was sexually harassing someone else, you would want that to be taken into account. But we're not trying to be anybody's thought police. We just want to make sure that the work environment is a place where everybody feels welcome.
Hey, Doug, you mentioned was it an implicit bias test that you took? Where did you find that? I'd be curious.
I can try to find it for you and send it over. It was Harvard's implicit bias test. So maybe if you Google it, it might come up, but if not, I can try to find it.
So I'll look. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and they have several of those on different topics as well now.
Thanks, Doug. I really I liked what you were saying about your survey, and it seemed a little and maybe I heard it wrong, but did you say that you didn't include, and it wasn't 100% DEI questions? You had some other questions as well, and what were the kind of what were those questions about? And did people feel like, did you have any kind of people who were upset that, hey, we got tricked into this kind of thing?
Yeah, well, so the way that we approach it isn't by like trying to like say like, okay, we're going to do a DEI survey, but we're going to call it something else. What we did is we took our normal company survey that we frequently do, and we just re-examined that with a DEI lens. And we're like, how can we like, so now we're going to ask people about like optional questions like, do you identify with any of these communities, right? Like, shocking to me as somebody who writes books for trans kids, I didn't even realize I have 3 trans co-owners that I work with. So like, it was very enlightening for me in that way. But we incorporated those questions into our normal survey. So it was a surprise for some people. Some of the questions, people were triggered by that, and we did get some ugly responses. But overall, this wasn't, it wasn't a whole new survey. It was just a new way of looking at our old survey with a couple of questions in there to help enlighten us.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
I have a question for Doug. Did you use Gracie for the like deeper as you were doing your planning? Like, for example, did you use her when you were developing the red teaming concept or some of these other things? How far down did she go into your planning process?
Gracie is involved in everything.
Right.
And we've just kind of, I mean, sometimes she'll be in the meeting, sometimes she won't be in the meeting, and we'll send her updates. But we've kept her very much in the loop through this whole thing, very communicative. Whether it's like when we crafted our statement on Black Lives Matter, she was involved in that. When we made some decisions about brands that we had that we felt were maybe appropriative or insensitive, we reached out to her about those. Yeah, she's been very involved. We talk to her weekly.
Okay.
Good question, Susan. Thank you, Doug, again for your enlightening topic. Now, I realize it's important to tailor it specifically to your facility, to your group, to your locality, I guess, more than anything. Did you find it was easier or more important to source locally, or are there national resources that us, obviously in the Midwest and across the country, can utilize to kind of at least create a platform?
No, that's a great question. We've done both. For instance, is not from the Pacific Northwest, so we found her in a national search of consultants. Crafted for All is a national organization. Beer Culture, spelled with a K, is another one that we've worked with that is a national organization. We've, as far as like trying to find like local partners to make part of our community involvement efforts, as far as like supporting nonprofits and collaborating on beers and stuff like that. We've tried to keep that more local because that's kind of our, that's kind of part of our culture. But as far as any kind of resources, we didn't care where we got them from. We just and reaching out to people too. It's like you reach out to somebody in Texas or Georgia or Maine, and people have always been very excited to like share their, to have discussions with us about their work.
Excellent. Very good. Thank you.
Yeah.
We better swap to Eric, who's actually presenting on the MBA's take on DEI and resources that we're hoping to develop for members. So that might be a good segue. What do you think, Doug? Is that all right?
That was great. Yeah, and feel free also, there's my email. Feel free to email me if you have any follow-up questions.
Well, I hope I'm not the reason why he just froze. Is that just me or is that him?
I don't know. You're
Who froze for you?
I think Eric froze. Does anybody have background cricket noise they could put in now?
Speaking of backgrounds, Rob, what is your background?
It's a blur.
It's a very nice blur.
Very blurry. I think it's for everyone's benefit.
You got a sound effect on there too.
I don't know what happened to Eric there. Let's see. I'm gonna read it.
Hey, there he is.
Are you trying to share your slides?
Sorry, everybody. Yeah, I went to share my screen and then it froze. So let me try that again. Can you hear me?
Yep,
Absolutely. There you go.
there we go.
Try that again. Went into presentation mode and it froze.
Perfect. You're in.
Okay. Yeah, I got cut off right when Susan was saying that was a good segue, and I agree. I don't know what I said after that, but I'm just going to jump into it. This shouldn't take too much time. Doug, I really appreciate that. You know, at Pizza Port, we're going through a similar journey, so I'm going to be hitting you up separately to ask you some specific questions. For those of you guys on this call who don't know Pizza Port has 5 brew pubs in the San Diego area. 4 of them are small brew pubs that are 750 to around 3,000 barrels a year. And then there's one large production facility, 40,000 barrels a year. My position at Pizza Port is Director of Facilities and Operations. But everybody in the brewing industry knows that just means I do whatever I need to do. And then on the personal side, I'm married and have 2 wonderful kids. I bring that up because much like Doug's dog, I'm at home right now, and a 7 or a 4-year-old may run in here and express their love for the brewing industry. And then also because my wife is very appreciative of the Milwaukee district, because this is probably the first time I've brushed my hair or worn a collared shirt, maybe since the last time we went out on a date. So she appreciates that very much. All right. Good. So yeah, as Susan mentioned, I'll be kind of discussing what the Master Brewers Association is doing from a DEI perspective. In general, I think the MBAA recognized that there is an opportunity here. And so they charged a task force to basically go out and answer that question of, is there opportunity for improvement from a DEI perspective within the MBAA? That task force is led by Susan, and there's 20 other volunteers across the industry that are serving on that task force. And we kind of took that initial charge from the executive committee and said, okay, if we're going to do this, we're going to do this properly. We're going to need to do this in certain steps. And so the first phase of this task force was really just learning and assessing what the current state of the DEI environment was within the industry, within Masters Brewers Association specifically, and really evaluate, what the need was and if there was a need. Then we took that information that we collected, which I'll go over in a little bit more detail in a second. And we have developed an action plan that we said, yeah, there is an opportunity here. And this is what we're recommending to the executive committee to improve it. And we are now in the 3rd phase, which is that's been presented to the executive committee for approval. They're currently evaluating that. And we are deciding collectively what that path forward looks like. We've essentially asked to be transitioned from a task force to a standing committee within the MBAA and to execute that action plan. So I want to kind of preface everything that I'm about to present as this is still in progress, and we're still at the level of this is what we're presenting as our action plan, and we're waiting for approval, if that makes sense. All right, and these slides are built assuming people are going to read them with me not presenting. So I'm not going to, you'll see some eye charts on here. I'm not going to read word for word. I'm going to try to kind of keep the presentation side short and sweet so you guys can ask questions, but just feel free to interrupt me at any point. All right, so the first question we asked was, does an opportunity exist? We did an informal survey within the MBAA, collected a lot of information, and our short answer to a long question was, yeah, there's an opportunity here. The industry overall is predominantly white and male. I don't think that should surprise anybody on this call. And MBAA membership, while slightly different numbers, skews in the same direction of predominantly white and male. Doug did a really good job of presenting a lot of the reasons why, at least from a business perspective, we feel like that discrepancy leads to an opportunity for improvement. But really just my personal interpretation of it is along the lines of, you look at the MBAA like vision, mission, and values, even on these slides, it's in the bottom corner. United We Brew is kind of the concept that whole mission, vision, values is built on for the Masters Brewers Association. And when you look at, macro level demographics for what, the America's kind of demographics look like, they're very different from what the MBAA is. And so we see an opportunity where if we can skew closer to more kind of average demographics, that there's an opportunity there to have more voices in that United We Brew family, lending more expertise, more opportunities. It's going to make the MBAA a stronger group. In that kind of preliminary survey that we did, this informal survey we did with MBAA members, we asked many, many questions, but one of kind of the big stories that came out of it is the vast majority of respondents to that strategy indicated that yes, having a strategy to ensure a diverse, equitable, and inclusive workforce was important to their individual success. But 20% of those respondents, 70% said it was important, but only 20% are getting some sort of training or guidance on DEI regularly. So you can see there's a big gap, right? It's very important, but not getting a lot of education or tools, kind of what Brad was just touching on. Hence the good segue. Thank you, Brad. And so as a result, they look outside this organization specifically for help. So that was kind of the summary of our phase one was, yeah, we answered the question fairly easily that an opportunity exists. Step two for this task force was then to say, well, what are we going to do about it? What is our proposal to the executive committee to say, this is how the Master Brewers Association should tackle improving DEI, both within the organization and offering tools to its members to improve DEI. And so we broke that up into kind of 4 parts. And within those volunteers on this task force, those 4 parts are sub teams. We're calling them tracks. They're like subcommittees with members that are tackling each of these goals. The way we looked at it was these 4 tracks, really educating the committee, the task force itself. So we recognize that we're not experts. Like for me personally, before I volunteered for this task force, I had never sat on a DEI committee. I would never profess to be a DEI expert. And there's a lot of volunteers that have similar backgrounds. So it was like, if we're going to talk about something, we need to educate ourselves so that we know exactly what the hell we're talking about. So that first track was really dedicated to collecting resources for within the team so that we can become, just basically increase our expertise. Track 2 was really looking up the MBAA ladder. So like providing solutions to MBAA leadership. That's both the executive committee and at the district level. So part of the reason why we're sharing with you guys today is recognizing that, we're going to provide a toolbox and some opportunities, and we need to educate the leaders that are going to disseminate that throughout the organization. And then the next track is really looking down through the organization to the individual members and providing them with tools so that they can answer the questions they've got on DEI. And then the last track is really looking at where does the MBAA fit in with other ally organizations. There's a lot of groups. Doug mentioned several of them. I know Beer Culture, Crafted for All are two that I've worked closely with, and Pete supports. DEI Journey, Pink Boots is another organization. There's other groups out there that we want to make sure that we fit in with. The BA, just, you know, we want to know how are we fitting in with those groups and amplifying efforts versus, you know, duplicating work or that type of thing. So there's a group that's looking on at how MBAA will interact with outside organizations as well. And that's really, as I said before, where we're at. We've presented that action plan to XCOM and are waiting for approvals. They've given us a very thoughtful response back that we are still working through and will potentially modify some of these goals. But we're at the point where we are ready to be converted into a committee and start actually putting some of those actions in place. And, you know, that's all with the goal of to tomorrow's Master Brewers Association, which is as diverse, equitable, and inclusive as possible, hearing as many voices as we can to make ourselves better brewers. So that's really the bulk of the presentation. Like I said, I was planning on kind of screaming through that and talking through it more than reading the slides. At this point, you know, kind of want to give Susan the floor for a second to correct all the bad stuff that or the wrong stuff that I said and say, supplement anything I missed. And then any questions from you guys that you might have. Susan, you wanna talk about maybe what we're doing next?
Sure, that's great. That was wonderful. Thanks. You know, I mean, as I was watching that, I was thinking we're still at the point where we can't give super concrete deliverables, but I can share with you what we have done already in terms of deliverables and the kind of things that we think that we will be providing as we work with the executive committee on finalizing and formalizing the action plan. So we carried out the survey last year and got actually, I think we had, Eric, was it 800 respondents? It was a really great response rate. It was in the high 20s or low 30s. That gave us a lot of information about, you know, as Eric said, where we're at. We also worked with Dr. Jane Crafted for All to do a self-assessment of the MBAA. So as Eric said, whereas the first track is really about the committee getting to know each other and gathering resources. The second track is really about the health of the MBAA as an organization around DEI. So we're going to be reviewing all of our protocols and methods, just like Deschutes is doing for its organization, to make sure that our language is inclusive and equitable, and that we are making sure to, that we're not offending anybody within the MBAA structure itself. And then, as Eric said, the third track is about providing toolboxes to members. And that you would see in things like the toolbox, similar to the safety toolbox set that we have on the online, on the MBAA.com, but also workshops and webinars. The mental health webinar that Chris referred to in the very beginning of the meeting came to you by virtue of the DEI Task Force. So you'll see things like that. You'll also probably see a workshop that is related to hiring practices around DEI at the Cleveland conference at the end of this year. And then finally, like Eric said, we feel that it's really important to have this conversation be pre-competitive with respect to the BA or Pink Boots or anybody else. We want to make sure that the industry, that we're part of the industry conversation. So some of that was repetitive, but I did want to leave you a little bit with the knowledge that while we are working out the actual action plan with the executive committee, we are also in the midst of projects to sort of elevate the conversation around DEI within the MBAA. So part of that is being here So we really appreciate the invitation.
Well, nonetheless, let's not forget we've come a long way, considering that this organization was founded by white German men. Now we've included Scandinavians, among others, but it's still come a long way over the years. So we shouldn't beat ourselves up too much, but we still have a long way to go. There's no question about it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think one needs to beat anybody up. It's I think we have found a great deal of enthusiasm and engagement already. And, you know, like Doug said, if you work with people and you want to sell to people, this generally it feels pretty like, yeah, okay, we should do this, you know? So it's been a pleasure. I mean, we've had a great year. One of the things that we do as a task force is we have monthly happy hours with speakers that have a special, you know, aspect of DEI. And we've just had a great deal of camaraderie. It's been an incredible experience, even at the task force level. So all good. I think another thing you might be seeing in the future is a community of practice around DEI within the MBAA, which is sort of a different way to engage in the conversation.
And I think we're looking for something like that within the district as well. You know, Wisconsin is sort of diverse. I suppose it depends on where you are. Regionally diverse, okay. So it's difficult to come up with ideas on how a district can get started on something like this. Have you got any, does anybody have any suggestions for that?
Well, we will be inviting the district leadership to one of our happy hours in the next couple months. So that would be an interesting place to start, you know, to just join us and brainstorm.
Okay.
I would also, if you have not seen craftedforall.com, Doug referenced it. I said that I've used that. One of the primary goals behind the way Dr. J set that website up was to give specific actions that an organization can look at to just assess. And it's a very valuable way. I mean, you could do it, you know, district as an organization, a company, a brewery, whatever. It's applicable to all levels, but it'll give you an idea of good tools for assessing where you're at and which ones need specific actions. We went through it, and some things were like, hey, we do this well already, and there's not a need to change. And then others, it was like, just one small example Doug touched on as well. We rewrote all our job descriptions, and it was spurred off of one of those suggested actions to gain kind of more inclusive language. So craftedforall.com is a great tool. Did I just freeze again?
No, you're good. That was, yeah. And Chris, you can find that self-assessment tool at Crafted for All. If you have any issues with finding it, let me know, because we have it.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Eric. That's a very good tool.
Yeah, I've got a question for the group. We are currently hiring, and other than posting on Pink Boots, are there other ways that we can kind of increase the diversity of our applicants? Has anybody had any success with that?
We're kind of in the process right now of like figuring this part of it out. My subcommittee, community outreach, has been really like, what I've tasked them with just this month actually is reaching out to, because like obviously there are national job boards, but when you're hiring, a lot of times you have to hire locally, and a lot of times I don't know about for you all over there, but like Portland is a very white community, you know, and Bend is even whiter. Mm-hmm. And we're saying like, hey, if we want to, you know, expand our racial diversity in our company, like for a long time, the attitude's been like, well, you know, it's a white area, what are we going to do? And so like trying to be more proactive about that. What we've just started doing, and I don't have results for this, I'm sorry, but like what we've just started doing is reaching out to local organizations and just saying like Black United Fund or Caldera Arts, these organizations that work a lot with underrepresented communities, and saying like, hey, I'm just going to be straight up with you. Like, we would like to expand the net that we're casting for our hiring. Do you know of any job boards? So like just yesterday, I sent a bunch of those emails out. So we'll see what the responses are. I imagine a lot of people will just be like, oh, I don't know, try Craigslist, you know, but we might find something really interesting.
Okay.
Not much of an answer, but that's what.
No, that's great. I mean, I think it really kind of allows us to stretch in different areas and think about, you know, how to really reach out and find qualified candidates who would bring a different perspective. So we're struggling with that. I would, you know, love to see more diversity. Yeah.
I think that's going to be the topic of the workshop in Cleveland, because one of the most practical needs that companies have is like, okay, I want to go there. How do I do it? And secondly, I just want to say, like, within the MBAA, you know, they've had 3 women presidents within the last 140 years, right? And 1 Black president, 1 person of color that I know of. They also, just within the organization, right, they have that challenge. And we were talking about it the other day and saying, you know, once again, you can't beat yourself up. That is what it is. And it will take some time to create that pipeline. So one thing that we're probably going to do is set a goal for, you know, maybe 2 years out, right? Like X amount of time from now, we want to have, evidence in the pipeline, right? That we are succeeding in building the likelihood of leadership being non-cis white male.
You know, I feel like the Master Brewers is in a pretty unique position as an educational organization to also include a focus on educational outreach, you know, like providing opportunities for people to develop the skills to become brewers and kind of come to the industry that way. Is that something that's been sort of on the table and talked about already?
Definitely, we have talked about, for example, Garrett Oliver has got Michael James Jackson Foundation for Brewing and Distilling, which is actually providing money to people of color to enter brewing education programs. And we're trying to figure out whether there's a way to work with him as a committee, the mentorship, you know, for students. It's education is the way in, and it's sort of, you know, begins obviously before people are members, but yeah.
And just to add to that, you know, one of the task force one in this committee is focused on establishing a resource library for members so that you know, anybody can further their own personal education. That's one of the things we realized was there was a big opportunity to have as many of those resources in one place as possible so that people could have a place to go to learn.
Tom here, says David, but I'm at my son-in-law's house. When I joined the MBA in 1960, education was the main factor for getting a job or getting the different levels of master brewer involvement. That's the only thing I see right now is education. Unfortunately, most our people that have the education happen to be white and male, and that's just the way it's been. And I don't know how you're going to change that. Living in Milwaukee, education is the worst thing we have, and that's why we're having problems.
Yeah, structural issues. And I think, you know, that's the other reason to be mindful of how structural it is and how it does take time, you know, to change these things.
Yeah, this isn't something you snap your fingers and overnight. It's a different situation. And we're under no pretense that that's our goal. It's more of how do you make those lasting improvements? I view it as like turning a ship, right? Like big giant ocean tankers. They don't turn on a dime. You start slow and it slowly starts turning, and then after the fact, it's moving in the direction that you want. So yeah, it's not something that's going to happen overnight, Tom. There's no doubt about that.
Just a quick question, 8,000 breweries in the US, microbreweries and brew pubs. What's the percentage of owners that are non-American or non-white? I hate to say that, but it's small, and it's tough because they don't have the education, they don't have the funding. That's a big concern.
One of the things that we're going to hopefully do is find success stories around the country with breweries. In other words, celebrating the breweries that are perhaps minority owned or woman owned or Black owned, and creating sort of the example that this is happening and that we are seeing more of it, and talking about it. So that's been interesting. I can't think of any in Wisconsin that come to mind that are women owned. But there's Bow and Arrow, which is in Albuquerque, New Mexico, owned by a Native American woman. There are myriad breweries across the country now that are Black owned, as we saw through the Black Lives Matter. What was it called? The
Black
beer.
is beautiful.
Black is beautiful. Thanks, Amy. Women-owned breweries. Equity Brewing in Oklahoma is woman-owned and has a very strong social justice mission. True Colors Brewing, where Brian Favor, who had been the brewmaster at Deschutes, where Doug worked, has got a social mission to reduce gang violence and create peace by employing current gang members in a brand new brewery that is in the inner city of Wilmington. So there are these amazing stories that are happening. And I think by virtue of the brewing industry's general sense of social engagement and, sharing a beer and breaking bread, it is a good fit. We just need to continue to celebrate the other.
I think Wisconsin has 4 or 5, and unfortunately, it would be nice for those people to be involved in these types of Zoom meetings if they could get the information from a group like the Master Brewers and say, here's something that you should listen to and weigh in on it. And again, I don't know how many people are on tonight, but out of 350 members we have, I doubt if we have 20. And that's just, to me, is pathetic. And I've been in this industry 60 years, so I'm not speaking from a little kid here. So
Yeah.
17,
Yeah.
Tom.
I'm passionate about the industry. It's been good to me for all these years. It's put all my kids through college and stuff. So I can't think anything but thank them very much.
Yeah, I think we all have a soft spot for the brewing industry. It's there's a lot of good. You hear some stories that are not good in our industry. Breweries that really fail at this. And recently, where there have been some pretty disturbing stories in the news, but we can't fail to celebrate the wins. So, I think, yes, it's a bummer that more of the 350 members aren't on, but on the other hand, we've got a wonderful, this has been really great. And we look forward to more opportunities to let you know the progress that we're making. So.
Side note, pandemic going on, just saying.
I'll support
But
it.
we, by you presenting this to us, and thank you very much for that, at least we can help get the word out.
Yeah. Yeah, and her stories. So if you know of some people that aren't members of the MBAA, but that that are particularly doing it well, we want to know. That's one of the things that we're collecting for the resource library that Eric mentioned. So.
I had a question, but I can actually, to what you just said, there is a TV show called, I think it's just called Brood, out of the Quad Cities in Iowa, that just got a hold of me asking if I knew any women in the brewing industry that they could talk to, and I pointed them towards Octopi, who has quite a few women. Rob, you want to unmute and jump on this conversation? Rob works over at Octopi. I know they have, as far as gender goes, a relatively diverse staff. And so I sent them over there, and I think they're going to be doing a news article on it soon.
And I know there was a crew interviewing two of our female brewers, Nat and Hannah. Oh, I want to say last week or the week before. So I know we're doing some. Our hot side staff are women, or just shy of that. Joe, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this one.
I'd have to do a count in my head. I mean, we've got 3 women on the hot side team, but I feel like with all the weekend staff and everybody too, I think it's probably like 5 dudes, but I'd have to do a count.
Fair. But it's definitely, it has been encouraging as I've been at October over the last 2 years, watch us grow, that there has been more diversity as we brought more people on. I mean, just to see the women in the brewery transition over to the brewing side, and then just different walks of life. So it's interesting.
Was that by intent, or is there like, what do you point to as leading that change? Is there a cause for that, or is it just happening?
If I'm being blatantly honest, I would say rapid expansion. I unfortunately don't think there was a direct intent to doing
Rob,
these conversations at work.
Yeah.
So
I think, Rob, I think you could argue that Isaac and Jared are inherently open to diversity, like that. I mean, Isaac's an immigrant.
That's true, but again, I have not been included in those conversations, so I don't want to speak above my pay grade, basically.
I also think with Octopi specifically, and I think it's to Rob, you talking about rapid expansion, we tend to draw from a broader geographic area than just locally. Like Wanakee is not at all diverse, and Madison is kind of diverse in a few superficial ways. And but you talk to anyone at Octopi, and odds are they're not from Wisconsin. They moved there for that job because they got recruited nationally somehow, or saw the job application somewhere else and moved to Wisconsin to work at Octopi. So I think there's a lot of that going on too.
I think that's a lot to say for the welcoming atmosphere that they might, that is at certain breweries. I mean, some breweries you can look at, and I think the elephant in the room is Deb Carey from New Belgium. I'm sorry, New Glarus.
Glarus, yeah.
Exactly. But they've got quite a few women on staff as well. And I think that speaks a lot to, thank you, Chris. What Doug was talking about is making, just making an attempt to be welcoming. So.
One thing that is interesting is that a lot of times when we hire for diversity, when you're doing it mindfully, you're hiring a person of color or a woman, but gender issues, LGBTQ is a different thing. You're often not aware that you're hiring an LGBTQ person. And now that you have this person or a group of people in your brewery, are you welcoming? Is there implicit bias going on that is exclusive to their happiness or their feeling of inclusivity? And I think that this is something that we haven't talked about very much as an industry yet, but we need to. Doug, I don't know if you.
Yeah, no, I think, like I said, I never would have applied for a job in even in the front of the house, like pub side of the brewing industry ever, because of my preconception. And again, some of that's on me, but my preconception that this is a cisgender white man's organization where I was made to feel excluded in the past. So like having like that kind of, that again goes to my point that like diversity breeds more diversity. Like having LGBTQ people already there meant that I was there, meant that my friend Sasha, who's a lesbian, came and worked there. But also part of that, like what we did a couple of years ago is we put out, like when we put out our pride flag, we like said, you know what, let's just not take that main one down this year. Like when we took all down all the other rainbow stuff, we left that one out there. And this is just anecdotal, but like, I felt like I noticed way more people from the LGBTQ community coming in as in like creating fans out of these people who felt now safe there. And then I feel like over the last year too, with our Black Lives Matter banner, that we've also had like, again, anecdotal, but it seems like we have a lot more Black fans and Black families coming in to spend their time with us. So, you know, just even from the pure business side of it, it seems like it was, you know, been very helpful.
Yeah.
I do have to, jump off because I do have a class here in 10 minutes. So thank you so much for having me. It was wonderful. Feel free to send me an email, dreynolds@deschutesbrewery.com, if you have any follow-up or questions that we didn't get around to. So thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Doug.
Thank you, Doug.
Appreciate
Thank you,
it.
Doug, so much.
Yep.
I feel like we're eating into the hot gossip time that everybody was so looking forward to. Any other questions for us, or you guys want to transition?
I'm gonna have to sign off here. My daughter needs her system shortly, so
That's because Tom doesn't gossip.
I don't gossip.
He does, but it's old world gossip. He uses a lot
Better
of these
believe
and
it. I'm an
thous.
old guy. I say, you want an opinion, ask Deb Carey. She'll give you an opinion.
Oh.
Tom has gossip
Business
about like
together,
wooden
so let's have
wheelbarrows
fun.
and stuff.
Ouch. Well, Tom was in that picture in 1935 Master Brewers Convention.
Saw him.
Take care, Tom. Best to Margie.
I go back decades, so yeah. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Hey, Tom.
Talk to you again.
Thanks,
Yep.
Tom. Good to see you.
All right. Great. Goodbye.
Yeah, thank you everyone for your time and this presentation. It was awesome. I appreciate it. I know the group does as well.
That's
Appreciate
great.
the opportunity. Yeah. Sorry, Susan.
Food for
Thanks
thought.
very much, Susan. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
All right,
All right.
now the juice.
Yeah.
Wait, we don't need to adjourn or anything, do we?
We already did.
No,
Okay, okay,
Tom needs help signing up. Oh, there he